Welcome to In the Arena, a show where entrepreneurs and leaders take us behind the headlines and into the biggest crises of their careers and lives, and how they made it to the other side. I'm Jesse Genet, a startup founder and your host, frequently joined by guest hosts who have also built companies and seen some things themselves. On this season of In the Arena, we ask our guests to relive their most challenging professional and personal moments in painstaking detail. From major deals collapsing to public scandals and even being sent to prison. More importantly, we hear how they came back from the brink as they share their biggest lessons, mental frameworks, and earned wisdom with us. So, let's go into the arena. Today, Erik and I are excited to be joined by Austen Allred. Austen is the CEO and founder of BloomTech, an education platform famous for pioneering income-sharing agreements instead of just charging tuition. His company has forever altered thousands of students' lives for the better, but having a huge positive impact doesn't make actually running and growing a company easy.
How the company was actually doing is almost inversely proportionate to the amount of hype that we were receiving. Not quite 100%, but and it's honestly really awkward when everyone externally is telling you that everything is going great, and then you're trying, you have no freaking idea, you know?
Today, he goes in depth on his own personal experience running BloomTech, as well as the cultural transformation he realized the hard way was necessary.
We're joined today by a very special guest, Austen Allred of BloomTech. Austen, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you both. It's been a minute.
So we want you to share with us. There have been so many moments that have been really intense while you're growing your company, and hopefully we get to cover several of them. But I really just want to ask you, for you personally, what is a moment where you feel like things have gotten really existential? So it's not an external factor necessarily. It's that you feel like, holy moly, I don't know if we're going to get through this, or I don't know if I'm going to get through this because XYZ is so intense. If you could find that for us, and then when you find that painful moment, I will just probe and probe and probe. So you just take us there if you can.
Yeah, it's perfect. The funny thing is, when you're first getting started, everything felt like an existential moment. And then it's funny that looking back, the times that felt like existential moments actually weren't existential moments at all. And the times that, it's not quite the inverse, but the times that were actually the most pivotal, I think were the most pivotal because I'm thinking of one particular instance. I can remember when it felt like I was walking around Lake Austin with one of our investors, it's Travis in Austin, right? The company had a ton of money. We were, press was mostly good things. All of our numbers were, nothing was broken, but I felt worse then than I felt at times when we had, 1/50th that amount of money in the bank. And
Interesting.
Yeah. I think.
And so you're walking around, I guess, try to set a scene for us. You're walking around the lake. It sounds like you're with an investor. And if you're doing okay at that moment, there's some cash in the bank and stuff, what is feeling so existential, and what are you personally feeling in that moment? Like maybe I can't go on anymore, or I don't know, just what is it actually like that day?
Yeah. So first of all, I remember it was hot as hell. And the particular investor I was with, I don't know if he just does it. He loves to go on walks all the time.
Does it perspire?
Yeah. And I was just I was in jeans, and it was north of 100, which doesn't bother. I just remember being oh yeah, surely we're not going to be out here for very long. And 4 miles later, we're still, having a heart to heart. But the thing that felt off was we weren't headed in the right direction. It wasn't that, and that's honestly when I think things are the most difficult, is when you don't want to be the bearer of bad news to everybody around you. You're trying to, keep everybody encouraged. And it's difficult because there's no forcing function to make difficult changes. Like in more recent times, we've had moments that on paper look far more existential, but it's been so obvious what we need to do because you do what you have to do. Whereas that time, and that was part of what was broken, was the culture felt more comfortable than we should have. And so, as a founder and CEO, you're always like you always have a little bit more information than anybody else. So you don't want to there's stuff that you just take in and it bounces off and it doesn't affect anybody underneath you or around you. And it just, you let it all die with you. But the times that are the most difficult are when you have to force. So I think that was what was the most difficult. It was right around when we decided to do a second round of layoffs, which sucked.
What year is this?
Was probably 2020, 2021.
The world is calm. Everything else in the world is going great. So it's just you guys really having these issues.
Well, no, the funny thing is I feel like we're just the inverse of everything all the time. Because in 2020, after, COVID hit the fan is when, we raised our biggest round. We had, more money in the bank. Things were going really well. And then we sat around in a board meeting and said, you know what, we need to shift everything and get to cash flow positivity, because up until then, it was always just everything was up and to the right, and you just go more and more and more, bigger, bigger, bigger. But realized that the money train was going to slow down eventually, and we just have it. We turned down a nine-figure term sheet, and that was hard and a little bit crazy, but I'm so glad that we did. We would have been one of those very dramatic blow-ups where you run headfirst into a brick wall because you can't raise the next funding round and you have to lay off 800 people. That's the path that we were headed on. And so you're like, okay, do I, keep fixing the plane as we're flying it? Or do I do I pull up right now and make the difficult decision? And you look like an asshole in the short run, but in the long run, it's the right thing to do.
Hey, everybody. Erik here with a word from our sponsor, Pesto.tech. Are you finding it time-consuming to hire high-quality remote developers? Pesto.tech is a hiring marketplace that makes finding great remote developers fast and easy. They use large language models to evaluate developers along dozens of parameters, including code quality, performance, and security. All you have to do is answer 5 simple questions on their website, and Pesto.tech will find you world-class remote developers that fit your company's needs. I've heard great things about Pesto.tech from friends like Ryan Hoover, who are investors. So if you need to start hiring developers fast, go to Pesto.tech today. That's Pesto.tech.
And so there's kind of a facing this fact that you're going to need to do this second layoff. And I've done not one, but 2 layoffs as well. So I can commiserate a little bit.
Same.
Well, they always tell you, right? In the first layoff, it's like, hey, make sure to cut so deep that you'll never have to do this again. And I think our first layoff, we were we ended up cutting I think it was 10%. It was small, but it felt so big. And not that any layoff is small, right? There are people, but I remember thinking we have cut to the bone. There is no more
Totally.
I was so dumb.
And so when it's hitting you that you're going to have to do the second one, like walk us through some of the very real considerations and emotions about like how you're going to have to communicate that, what that means for things that you've told people that you're delivering, or I don't know, there's the realizing it, but then there's the consequences of it. And I'm guessing that's kind of what's hitting you as you walk around that lake as well.
Yeah. I mean, and underlying all of that was a culture that, I had created at the end of the day that was like the thing that I was really proud about the culture, because we cared about students more than anything else in the world. That's all that we cared about, was how can we help our students be as successful as they possibly can be. But what was missing was systems thinking, a way of like, people would heroically stay up all night helping, an individual student, instead of building a system that would make it so that that student and students after them don't need to seek that kind of help.
Need that support.
And like, when you raise as much money as we did, as quickly as we did, people are just detached from the financials and the reality. And like, it like, basically most of the meetings I had were like, hey, we should just reduce the targets to make them easier to hit so that, we make sure that we're being successful. And then me feeling conflicted because, I want everybody to feel successful too. Let's figure out, what's realistic and what we can actually achieve. And then, in the back of my mind, running the math as fast as I could and being like, but that does not get us to where we need to be. But there's a bit of a principal agent problem where the individuals in that room, we're spending somebody else's money, and like that, there's enough runway that you don't have to deal with that for a long time. And there's not even enough visibility into that to say anything. So you have to be the bad guy. And I was not very good in the early days of being the bad guy.
How do you reset culture like that? That's a hard reset. Do you, a very blunt question is, do you need new people? Like not 100%, but do you need different people, like, in leadership positions and stuff to reset a culture like that?
Yeah, probably. Maybe somebody else who's better leader than I am could do that without.
No, I wasn't asking if you should be replaced.
No. I'm saying like there may be somebody who can figure out how to do that without like switching around who's in the company.
Okay,
but I mean,
I get it.
The big thing that I've learned over time is like if you look at all the levers you have as a founder or a CEO, you've got maybe fundraising is over here, maybe brand building is over here, like recruiting and hiring/firing is 100 times more potent than anything else you have. And there are times when there are people that you shift the attitude or you shift the skill set or whatever. But the bluntest instrument is definitely effective, and that's changes in personnel. And some of like we had, and I don't want to like get too into detail so that people can try to reverse engineer like stuff that isn't mine to share, but there are like at leadership levels, not everybody sees eye to eye in all things, right? And like it's not, in fact, if anything, it's perhaps the most important and most difficult there, because as you both know, when you grow a company, especially quickly, you hire one person, and then before you know it, that person has hired 3 people, and each of those people have hired 5 people. And you're like, whoa, that was, I thought I was hiring one person. I was accidentally hiring 50. And if you want to shift that level, it's very painful, right? It's very, very difficult. And I think we've changed the culture very dramatically at BloomTech. And we had to change our name in tandem with that, which is also frustrating. But I think at the end of the day, the most difficult changes were the changes where we didn't really have to make the changes right there, but it felt wrong.
I feel like that's a highlight of true leadership moments where effectively there is no external forcing function forcing you to act. But there is just this sense. And I think that this sense of ambiguity, like what should come next and, oh crap, it's actually on me and a small circle of people to decide, is a feeling of extreme intensity. Did you have any thought partners, maybe aside from investors and stuff at that time? Or did it really feel like almost something you had to keep bottled up?
I think that was perhaps the most difficult part, is that I felt like I kind of didn't. And I think I started viewing things as wartime when other people thought that it was peacetime. And, to use the Ben Horowitz analogy, or whoever came up with that analogy. Yeah. And there are people who are really excellent at peacetime that are just not interested in wartime. And I 1000% get that, right? Like, there are people who have phenomenal careers by figuring out what company has, found that thing, and they just want to ride that thing and make it great. And, risk adjusted, that's probably the best way to make a lot of money in Silicon Valley, is, find that, late series A, early series B quality and just ride it as it ramps. And I don't want to say I didn't have anybody around the table that was thinking that way. But it was a shift, both in attitudes and people. I mean, to give you an idea, there was a time when people were like, wait, we shouldn't talk about like revenue at the company, because we don't measure our success in revenue. We measure our success in like grads placed, grads hired, lives changed. Like, that's the real metric. And so we weren't like, we weren't even having the conversation, right? I mean, in small circles, we would talk about, hey, where's revenue, where's costs? But like, it was so fluffy that, that, and perhaps that's an extreme example. And I don't want it to sound like we never talked about revenue. But there,
no, but I understand. It's like sometimes things a culture of what is what is acceptable or not acceptable, a certain company can run away with itself. I think about weaponized values quite a bit, and sometimes that can be extreme. I don't know if I'll give a short example from me, but we talked a lot about transparency, but then transparency could be weaponized. Someone would do something completely, like expose some detail completely unacceptably to a customer and be like, you told me we believe in transparency. And I was like, whoa, bro. Like, so it's like that or everything can be turned.
Inaccurate information with a reporter not realizing that it's inaccurate, and then you deal with lawsuits because of it.
So maybe like that's like, kinda? Yeah, maybe like that, and I think, but I want to go back to something you said about the name change. Like, there's just been so many intense things we've had to deal with, like maybe that, I don't know if you feel like that's a relevant one. The lawsuit stuff also seems super relevant, but you already mentioned having to change your name. So I thought maybe we could pause on that for a sec.
Yeah. And there are parts of that I can't talk about as a result of trademark lawsuit and settlement, but they happened in tandem. So what I can say is this was a trademark lawsuit that had been, going on for a while, and we spent a lot of money. I love the brand that we built. I mean, we had there are probably a half dozen Lambda School tattoos still out there from people who are like, holy smokes, you changed my life. This is the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm getting it tattooed on my body. I talked to the people with that I knew had tattoos individually, and they're like, look, it was, things changed. That was a temporary time in my life, and I will still always be grateful for Lambda School. You can name it whatever you want. Like, that's the brand that I love. And don't have to change that in a trademark settlement. But that was part of the shift from peacetime to wartime, is we're spending a lot of money defending that. Like, it's insanely expensive, insanely expensive. And I that was one of the things that, like, getting to brass tacks in reality was, as much as we love this brand that we've built and as much as we think we're in the right, we can't afford to keep spending this on.
It's not on mission. It's not helping you get that result of the students. Although I do want to just say wow to the fact that a founder experience you have is calling people with a tattoo to tell them that your company's going to be name changed. I mean, honestly, you just blew past that. Like, oh, like we've all done that. Like no,
I've got stories, you guys.
He's like, it's on my ass. No big deal.
Yeah, like, was one of these people your mom? Like, I don't know. I have so many questions that are probably not a good use of time right now.
Students. The one that I talked to was she was awesome. And I was like, can I? And she had a lot of tattoos. That was like her thing was, every major turning point in my life, I get a tattoo. And like that's
really sweet.
So there are a handful of that kind of thing. But anyway, I think that was actually the most difficult. There have been times when, fighting for survival and fighting for cash flow positivity actually felt easier to me than when you have no, we would have been able to spend money for another 2 years the way we were, and we would have run straight into a mountain. Making that change when no one around you wanted to make it was pretty difficult.
Yeah. Elon made layoffs cool, but it was a bit too late for us.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yeah. And then, to put things in perspective, you look at something like that and you're like, oh, okay, I guess I didn't have to lay off 5,000 people overnight.
Totally. Just even the logistics, with all the laws, I mean, just even the logistics of that seems completely.
I mean, I'm pretty sure they just said we can't even wrap our minds around most of this stuff, so we're just gonna do layoffs and we'll probably get something like Twitter is being run like a 5-person startup right now. It's just got billions of dollars in revenue and thousands of people, which I can't imagine anything messier. And the level of mistakes that they are making publicly and reverting very quickly is fascinating to watch.
It really is.
Because, and this is another example that I talk about. So we used to do a weekly email to the company. And it was just, hey, from Austen, here's how things are going. Here's what I'm thinking about. And before I knew it, I was spending all of my Friday with 3 or 4 other, high-level people writing this email. And it would go through revisions. And by the time it would go out on Monday, I was like, I am spending a fifth of my time writing this email. And yeah, you can justify that by saying, yeah, it's a cultural thing. People always refer to it. And but now I can't even fathom spending a full day writing an email. Granted, we're smaller now. Granted, we're more agile now. But that's just kind of representative of we were so careful about things that we didn't actually need to be careful about. That and my instinct. I think this is. I'm rambling a little bit here, but my instinct. I'm very, very comfortable in an extremely chaotic, extremely risky seed stage environment. And my mental model was, okay, I have to learn how to grow up and, play nice in a big company. And, my words matter so much more now. And everybody's not even just, I'm sure you've both experienced this, not even lingering on things that you said, but finding little phraseologies that you just said offhand and running down a rabbit hole of what that was meant to be.
Working on something for a week. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, you're like, oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that at all. And, so you try to eliminate all of that. And before you know it, you're just in this box of not doing anything meaningful, not saying anything meaningful because you don't want to say the wrong thing. You don't want to do the wrong thing. You spend all day planning projects on how you're going to plan the next project. And that I'm sharing some extremes, but I thought that that's what it meant to be a bigger company. And I thought that that's I was miserable. I freaking hated it. it's like against all of my instinct and I don't find it fun or enjoyable at all. But I thought that's what you have to do in order to make your company be successful. And so that's what we did. And
I
yeah.
have a riffing on this. Can you give an example of a moment where something happens where you're like, whoa, I thought I had problems, but this is a problem. Like a clarifying moment where I don't know if it is a lawsuit or something where you have one of those wake up calls where you're like, whoa, previously I was being like, whoa, my gosh, running a company is so hard. I thought I have all these problems. And then there's something that happens where you're like, now that's a problem.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if that happened to you, but I'm curious if there's a moment like that.
So not quite in that that level of instantaneousness has that happened, but certainly if I look back at what I thought was one of the first existential crises. So the backstory here is education providers are very ambiguously regulated in the sense that every state has its own set of regulations, and they are all built toward schools that have people in the building. And so, California was the state that we were in. And so technically, if you charge tuition and you are, if I teach somebody in Ohio, I have to abide by all of the laws and regulations in Ohio. And nobody does. 90% of schools just don't do anything, and it doesn't matter. But we wanted to be very careful. So we went out and we said, hey, we're in California. California has a bureau called the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education. We want to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the laws. We had our, startup lawyer kind of read through some of the regs, and they don't make sense. There's gray area all over the place. What do you think we should do? The lawyer basically sat us down and said, this part is so clearly meant to be for people with butt in seat that, you guys have a headquarters in California, but your instructors aren't in California. Your students aren't in California. So just don't worry about it, basically. And then, once we started getting really big, really fast, a couple days after we had an article about us in the New York Times, we got basically a fine from the state of California. The Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education said, hey, you need to register. And registering is not, there are parts of it that are difficult. Like, you're supposed to provide 3 years of financial history or more, and we didn't even have so you can't even do that. Yeah, you can't teach a student until you have registered, and you can't register until you have 3 years of financial history. So there's it's just an example, right? And I think that particular example is in California. But there's stuff like that where the law literally is impossible to follow all over the place.
Circular.
And so you just do the best that you can. And now, to give you an idea, we have an entire team who just goes around and keeps up with all the different state registrations when we enroll a student over here. So we're a remote school, but we have an office somewhere in San Francisco where you have to have copies of these records for all of the students in a locked file cabinet. It has to specifically be a locked file cabinet. So we have some flash drive in some file cabinet somewhere because that checks the box of it being files of all of the students that's updated every however often. Anyway, so within 24 hours we turn around and we submit our initial registration to the BPPE in California. And there are a couple articles about how we're trying to flaunt the law and the Uber strategy of just giving flipping the bird to the regulators. I was like, that's not at all. I was trying to be so that was the frustration. I was trying to be so careful and so by the book, and I was doing everything that I could. And I in retrospect, I got bad advice from counsel. And that's still something. But I thought that was the scariest thing in the world. If I heard about that now, it wouldn't I don't want to
no, it's not nothing. It's not important.
I have the benefit of hindsight, right? But the good news of most regulatory stuff is, generally speaking, if you're trying to work with them, they're trying to be reasonable to the extent they can within the law.
Mhm.
There are, I wouldn't say state, there are districts in the country where that's not true. But yeah, it wasn't existential. There are so many times, and I don't know that I thought it was existential, but that would keep me up at night. So stuff that used, I guess, what I'm saying is stuff that used to keep me up at night, I wouldn't even think about now, because and I think
well, you
some
just
of
wouldn't
that
be sleeping because there's so many things accrue over time that if you stayed up at night, you would just be up at night all the nights, and then you would just slowly perish.
Yeah, and that's one of the interesting things that I think people don't fully recognize is like everybody's, if you're talking to, let's say there's a VP of the company or something, they have an issue that is the most important thing to them and is completely valid and they need to deal with, and you have to learn to context switch incredibly quickly and be present in the moment for that specific thing, because it's not fair for you to bring other, like issues into that, that other issue, and to them, like, that is the thing, like that's the most important thing. And then, then similarly, when I go inside and I am hanging out with my family, and my 4-year-old couldn't care less about what.
She doesn't care about the BPPE.
No, not at all.
Weird.
Yeah, and
I thought she cared about you.
yeah. See, I guess what I'm saying is you have to learn to compartmentalize really well and context switch extremely well. And like my wife will say sometimes it feels like I like forgot how to feel emotion along the way. And that's in jest, but it's like you learn to just you learn to be so stoic about things, right? Like there are crazy ups and crazy downs, and you learn to manage your psychology, and you're just going to be even keeled through all of it. And the stuff that felt existential yesterday is going to feel fine tomorrow. And the stuff that felt like you're the genius and you figured it all out today, that tomorrow, you're looking at the data wrong or something. And it's not, and you
the
just
highs
say
are not as high as you thought, and the lows are not as low as you thought.
No, and they're dramatic, right? They're crazy, like, people people throwing tens of millions of dollars at you in 1 minute. It's just like the there's the wavelength. I guess the wavelength of the waves is really extreme.
You know the saying, everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about.
Yeah.
It's like every founder is fighting a lawsuit you know nothing about.
That's so true. That's so dark and so
and they can't talk about.
And they can talk about. Totally. I mean, that's I feel like from behind the scenes, that's 100% true. I don't know if I'm stepping on you, Erik, you can pivot us in a second here, but just hearing you talk, I'm curious about something that has happened where you feel like you had to do the most management with your team or communications, but you yourself felt like it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, again, kind of speaking to that gap between reality of what's existential for the company and like how much time you have to spend managing something. I don't know if anything comes to mind, but that's another gap I think quite a bit about. Some things can come into your world and take so much time, but they're not always existential.
Yeah, I think now I've honestly gotten better at not doing that. I mean, there are times when I would spend a lot of time doing stuff that I didn't think was important. And in retrospect, I look at that and I consider that a weakness that I was, one of my weaknesses is that I don't like making people feel uncomfortable. I don't, I'm a little bit of a people pleaser. Not because I need to or anything, but I like, everybody feeling pleasant in the moment. And so I guess the thing I have to force myself to do is feel uncomfortable and make something painful in the moment that I know will make things easier later on. And now I think I'm pretty close to the point where, like, if I don't think that something is important, I'll just say that, and I will pivot and shift. And to be clear, there are people that has rubbed the wrong way, like, a lot. But I think I've had to learn to be abrasive so that I don't endure stuff like that. There's still, I will say, the thing that I forced myself to pay attention to that is still like comp leveling adjustment, where like on an individual basis, like, you know, as a whole, the company, none of this is going to like dramatically move the needle, but it's just like, I need to spend an individual piece of time with that person's, you know, comp and benefits, and make sure that they're feeling good about things. And, you know, that's one of those, in aggregate, it definitely matters. If, you know, the individual cases, you know, and it's so hard when you don't have the context of, okay, we're moving that person from 120,000 a year to 127,000 a year. Like, to me, that's all like, you know, doesn't mean anything, but to them it does.
Of course, yeah.
So
We're asymmetric in that way, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier about managing our psychology, Austen, in one of our group chats, maybe one of the great entrepreneurs of our time said something along the lines of, "I don't believe in mindfulness meditation." What do you unpack?
Who that was, but that was fascinating.
Yeah, he's a friend of yours. When you unpack kind of what you learned from him, or just that concept, or like that, because that seems like a contrarian take among you know, entrepreneurs today, perhaps.
Yeah, and not from let's see. So I think, you know, I see this a lot, being on the receiving end of recent college graduates a lot as a school like ours. You know, I don't have any perfect solutions here, but I do feel like there's something fundamentally broken in the way that, you know, I'm not going to prognosticate problems of the United States of America or the world or anything like that. But I can say what we see locally is some people who are trained to think that any pain or suffering is the result of evil or wrongdoing, and that it is that feeling bad is inherently to be avoided. And you know, if you go down the kind of rabbit hole of the, you know, psychological, psychiatric basis, the Freudian theory behind that becomes like, oh, there are all these issues that you need to root out, and once you root out all the issues, you will not experience pain or sadness or what, you know, whatever that may be. And I think I've come kind of on the other side of that, to where pain is normal, suffering is part of life, and even, you know, beyond that, I guess the big thing that I have become skeptical of, and, you know, Eric, we can talk a little bit about where that conversation veered in that group chat. I've seen a number of CEOs who go on this like life journey, who am I and what makes me happy kind of thing. And it's very rare in my experience that someone who says, what makes me truly happy and feel fulfilled? And like, the answer to that is not being a startup CEO, right? Like, in the long run, perhaps, but in the short run, like, there are parts of it that really suck.
Painful. Yeah.
And look, we, you know, obviously none of us are in a like position to complain about how difficult our lives are relative to 99% of humanity. And really, most people who work in tech should not be complaining about a damn thing relative to most of the world ever. But I think it can be damning to seek self-discovery and think about one's own happiness at the expense of everything else. I think humans are happiest when they have something bigger than themselves to strive towards. And the most miserable people that I have ever met are the people who retired early from tech riches to go surfing and like experience, or, you know, go just like be in nature, or, you know, like you need something to strive toward. You need a challenge. You need a project. Yeah.
No, I my co-founder had a phrase, I'm curious, it resonates with you, which is pain is information. And I'm not sure the provenance of that. He may have gotten it from somewhere else, but effectively, like, every time you're feeling pain, you're actually receiving information about what is like there's a causal nature usually. Like if it's physical pain, there's like, it's like something's hurting you and being burned by the stove or whatever. But if it's mental pain or, you know, startup angst, there's usually a causal relationship. And so basically that completely transformed my thinking. Like, basically I would like to think of myself as someone who prefers to receive a lot of information. Therefore, a lot of pain actually makes sense. So that was a reframe for me. I'm curious if that resonates with you.
No, that's super interesting. I've never thought of it that way. I will say I've noticed, like, there are times, and we can go kind of to a couple levels of depth in this. There are times when, like, there's that, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, like, there's just something that like feels off or something that's nagging at you, but you just kind of suppress it because you've got to get through the day, or it's not the convenient thing to address right now, or whatever that reason may be. Like, every single time that I've been like, this feels off to me, but I don't want to rock the boat, or like, you know, this person's in a tenuous spot and I don't want them to leave, or whatever. Like, every single freaking time comes back to bite in like in a very material way. And the inverse is also true. Like, I actually tweeted about this a few days ago. Like, there are times when I am like looking at something, and I don't, this is gonna sound like hippie as hell. I don't even know.
Lay it on us. Like, we're ready. We're ready. I'm gonna meditate through this.
Yeah, everybody, close your eyes and imagine a cave. No, there are times when like I see something that is like good, for lack of a better way to describe it, and there's like an actual physical response. Like, I don't even know how to describe it, but like, it's not just like an emotional or an intellectual, like, oh, this feels good, but like there's like something that is like core, not even just your gut, but like something that's just core to who you are that says like, this is it, right? I think about that, you know, in investing sometimes, that, but like listening to that, both on the fear side and the good side, has been a better indicator of what will be successful and not than any amount of data that I've ever seen. And I think part of what I learned over the years is to really, really pay attention to that. You know, there's one of my favorite blog posts is by, I think it's Ben Horowitz. She talks about like run into the darkness. Like, you know, we talked about managing your own psychology. There are ways that you can like see something that's off and be like, okay, that's not my problem right now. And I do say at times like, that's a problem for future, Austen. Like, I will, you do have to like delay but if there's something that's like nagging at you and you're just unwilling to address, usually that means that there's something that's fundamentally broken that you're unwilling to fix. And oftentimes I find that that's the actual existential thing, and you're running away from it because the existential thing is scary, when you actually should be diving in and fixing it. And it's going to suck. Like, you know, when you lift up that rock, whatever you find underneath it is not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be a fun time in there. But that's like, you know, now I feel like I can run day to day, find the things that are like, what's causing me, you know, what's giving me the ick, as the Gen Z people would say. Go find that thing and start fixing it. And then, you know, where do you just feel really, really good, and, you know, do more of that. So I know I've become a believer, I suppose, in like not quite intuition. There's not really a word that we have to describe it, but like
trusting your gut, or like
that
that kind
yeah.
of phraseology, whatever
Yeah.
that means, I think is a good guiding force. I want to quiz you on something. I follow you on Twitter. I'm just going to open with that. And I think you, from my perspective, you do a great job of running an entity and all the complexity that comes with that, and also still having opinions online and basically like engaging online. And I know many founders who really struggle with that. Is that possible? Like, can you engage
I have so many
online
thoughts on it. I thought about
and
this
run a
at
company?
long
So
length.
I feel like you from the outside looking in, I feel like you do a good job. Before you answer general thoughts, I'm curious if there's any stories about when that actually has blown up on you that I don't know. Because I like, has it caused problems for you that I don't know? Because I can't really see into those. But then I'm curious about your opinions generally.
The answer to the first part is all the time. And I think that's one of the like counterintuitive things that like I've learned about it over time. Is there are founders who are both active in the conversation and very proper. Like I think of like a Patrick Collison who like, he's never stepped on a grenade and will probably never step on a comms grenade because he's just so well spoken. And like every time I see something that Strike PR puts out, I'm like, gosh dang it, like they did so good. I would have screwed that up so bad. But I've also like the times that we've had the worst experience that I've had the worst experience with that are like, Twitter for me started out, and I'm pretty open about this. It started out by being like a bad habit. Then we got into YC, and then I was like, hey, when we're in YC, I'm not tweeting. I am going to stay focused. And then like halfway through YC, there's something that I wanted a couple people to like try out. So I tweeted it, and we had hundreds of people like on demand looking at the stuff with me, giving me feedback. And I was like, okay, shoot, that's kind of powerful. I think at the time, I don't remember how many followers I had. It was probably like 20,000, which is both a lot and both not nearly, not what it is today. And I was like, okay, this is actually a tool that, is somewhat useful. But then as we got really big, really fast, like, we had an external PR team, we had an internal comms team that it was like, hey, everything needs to run through, these filters and like, be so freaking careful. And I think the result of that was that people lost trust in what I felt like people were slowly losing trust in what I was saying, and that it felt like we were filtering stuff through a PR filter because we were.
Because you were.
Yeah. Obviously there are things online that I'm not going to touch. It's just not worth,
not worth it.
But when I feel like the authenticity of me actually expressing my views, lets people understand what, like, sometimes I think about it as like inoculation. Like there are people who are very vocal all the time. I think like Delian from Founders Fund, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's very abrasive. And because he's been abrasive and has said dumb stuff in the past, like you give him more leash to be abrasive and say dumb stuff in the future because you're like, that's Delian, right? I'm sure the people at Founders Fund absolutely love his tweeting style. Elon is another example, right? Like I'm sure he would admit that he puts his foot in his mouth all the time. But you kind of build up an immunity to that in some extent, to where like if that's what people expect and they get that, that's not surprising. Where things go awry is when people are getting something other than what they expect. And I think just the way that I feel the most comfortable in relating with stuff is like I fully acknowledge I could be wrong. I could have a bad take on something. I could incidentally offend people, but if I try to bottle everything up and make sure that I never ever do that, then I combine that with like all of the, the company must be big and you must do things this way. And my instinct kind of like, there's good that a lot of good that comes of the ability to be frank and the ability to share what you actually think. That I don't know that you can buy that any other way. So I've made the conscious decision to like, it's not an accident. Sometimes I'll, like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have said it that way, but I made the conscious decision that I'm going to say what I think in a, as well-spoken of a way as I can. And part of that is, I want to work with the people that I want to work with. And if they're uncomfortable enough with me sharing what I think are very banal thoughts, like, should I say this? Yeah, I'm going to. There were people within BloomTech who were very frustrated that we were working with Amazon because they viewed Amazon as a union busting company. And they came to me saying, hey, this feels like, something that I wouldn't support. Do you think this is good? And I had to be like, yeah, I do think this is good. I think it's going to, and we, seen people change their lives because of it. I think, in this, is Amazon a good place to work? I think by all measures, you would say yes. And like, you don't have to agree with that, right? And that's okay. And I'm not going to fire you because you're at BloomTech if you don't agree with that. If you're trying to like blow that up or something, that's a whole other thing. But I know that in my executive team, we do not agree politically. We do not agree on many things, and we're there for the right reasons. But like, I know that because I know that the people on our team don't have to hide what they think about something. And that is key. Totally. Like when you start having to filter everything that you say based on who the audience is and keep track, like it's a losing battle.
The effort. Yeah. The effort is, I hear you saying that there's like a selection filter that can be positive because people are actually getting to know you, and then that attracts, that.
Yeah, look, if you don't want to work with me because I believe that capitalism is a force for good in the world, you're not going to like working for me anyways. So we may as well know that up front. Yeah.
Also, here's my kind of narrative about the company as an outsider, but you're also your friend. Lambda was this Silicon Valley darling, and just like every Silicon Valley darling, they get and on deck was a version of this too. You get a target on your back, and like many startups that are doing amazing, they suffer and then kind of fall from grace. They suffer from, they might have to pivot. They suffer from layoffs. We've all been there. There might be some lawsuits. There might be some bad press. You've dealt with the gamut, and now you're crushing it, and it's relatively quiet. And one thing we've reflected on privately is this idea of like, what is it like to adjust from this idea of being a Silicon Valley darling, which sometimes kind of happens out of nowhere, and it doesn't happen to everybody. And it's amazing while it's happening to that changing. And now you've bounced back, you're on the other side, and you're taking a much more sober approach. I'm curious if you could just kind of reflect on how you adjust from that transition.
There are a few ways that I can answer it, because it is, when you guys were at Product Hunt, that was like all anybody was talking about.
Exactly.
Ever. You probably like, I couldn't walk down the street in San Francisco without people trying to get a picture level stuff, right? I'm sure you guys, if not, we were like this weird, we weren't like a Silicon Valley facing Silicon Valley company. You guys were like the epicenter of the Valley. But I'm talking to one of our executives a couple hours ago, and we were just reflecting on the fact, and he's been at the company for like 4 years now, so he's a veteran. How the company was actually doing is almost inversely proportionate to the amount of hype that we were receiving. Not quite 100%, but like, and it's honestly really awkward when everyone externally is telling you that everything is going great, and then you're like, you have no freaking idea, you know? And, you know, and part of that, like, that's how it is at every company. But now I'll say that, you know, I'm not like as an individual off of Silicon Valley's radar. I think being on the Silicon Valley radar is unhealthy to a certain extent, right? Like it brought us talent that we wouldn't have, that we still have today. It brought us money that, you know, all of our competitors are dead. So those are nice. But turning from that into a real company, I think is a bigger gap than most people realize. Like turning, I mean, I'll share, you know, to give you some context, we went over the course of just over 2 years from burning $11.8 million a quarter to cash flow positivity.
Wow.
That is
Wild.
that is a big shift.
That's not just a big shift. That is monumental, and also just a massive accomplishment. Because now the stuff you're saying about culture change just like really hit me in the heart. Because basically, like, to get the people involved in your org to go from that mindset to the other mindset, like to get them over that hump. I mean, the execution is obviously everything, but that culture shift is massive too.
It's night and day, and it has to be, right?
Yeah.
And there are people who are still like, who made that shift. There are people who couldn't, and some of them were just not interested, right? Like it's not fun. It's cuts.
Well, it's hard work. It's just like literally hard work.
So much. I mean, I am so grateful for having to have done that, because now I feel like I know what it's like to run a tight ship. I know what it's like to have a truly high expectations bar and to act according to that. Like, reality forced us to do things that would have been really difficult to do when reality wasn't forcing us to do those things, right? And like, I honestly feel bad. It's going to sound very strange, but I feel bad for the companies that have never had to experience something like that, because I don't think you can truly get a company to the level of like strength per unit that we have without being forced to do it in some way. And so, you know, it was a massive shift. And to be clear, we're still not out of the woods. Like, there's still, you know, to be where I think the company ought to be, you know, we need to grow another 100,000x from here. We're still just barely scratching the surface. But I would take that over being a Silicon Valley darling 100 times over. 100 times over. And like, I've actually really loved, I mean, you know, there was a time when everything I would say was an article. There was a time where every step that I made was like, people were just paying attention to everything. And like, you try to not let that affect the way you operate, but like you filter some stuff, you know, like, 100%. And some of the people that I look up to are the founders who are able to do what they think is correct, even though they know they're going to get slammed by all the people who have no context. And, you know, they may be wrong sometimes, to be clear. But that's just a really difficult, like, I was not at that time in a place where I was mentally able to say, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. And I think that's one of the big things I learned over time through sheer trial and error is when to trust myself, when to bet on my interpretation of things, even knowing that may be wrong. over the crowdsourced version of things. And when you have to do things that are counterintuitive to everybody around you, even the people that you respect the most, in order to make a company successful. So I think, we're talking about like the difficult times. The reason it was so difficult is because I had not done that very well, and I had to full 180 shift to, no, we're doing what I think, because I would say, and everybody would say, like, you're the CEO, you're the founder, we defer to you, whatever you say goes. And then you'd be like, okay, let's do this. Like, well,
like, whoa, whoa.
with the exception of the thing that you just said, you're really just not considering this factor and this factor and this factor. And you have to get to it. It sounds weird and authoritarian, but like, you have to get to a point where this is what we're going to do, and you have to get on board, and you can disagree and commit, but this is it. That's the hardest when it's layoffs. That's by far the hardest.
The personal journey to get to a place of, I don't even want to call it comfort, because I think I don't really personally know someone who's just like, oh yeah, I'm completely comfortable with it now. But to get to a personal journey of just being ready to just do that over and over and over and over again, because that's what makes your company successful, is just massive, just massive personal travel all the way there.
Yeah. I mean, there's sometimes I'm like, am I learning the wrong lessons from this? And am I just like swimming in a soup of self-deception, where I'm telling myself, like, I'm blaming everybody else for all of the problems and saying that my intuition is perfect? But I know that that's not right either. It's just like the times when I felt really uneasy about something, and then we went and did the thing that I felt really uneasy about. And I was like, I don't think this is right. And I'm not, like, those were the times that we ended up making massive mistakes.
Well, what I hear you saying is not that you think you're always right. It's that you think that someone, and in this case, this is your literal job, needs to decide hard things routinely. That you're not always right. You didn't say that. You never said that. You said someone, because when you're describing these other feelings, and then it's a vacuum of leadership. It's a vacuum of someone making that hard choice. That's what I hear. I don't, if you know, I can always be misinterpreting, but that's what I hear, because that is the hardest thing, is just to realize that you look around and you're like, wait, someone's job is to make these hard choices. And you're like, oh shit. You're just like, wait, guys. But it's literally you. So I don't know. To me, I'm inspired.
All right, we need a chief hard choices officer that I can.
But I'm inspired by hearing you just fully come full circle and realizing that there's no one else in the room certain times, because that's your actual job, And I think it's just cool to hear you talk about that, frankly, and it resonates with things that I know about myself and others.
No, there are times that felt extremely lonely, right? Mm-hmm. And there are times when there were people who I have no right to have working on my side that continue working on my side. And like, I'll never, ever forget those folks who, step up and support and back you at those times. It's really, really cool it's incredible to be able to experience that. Like, there are people that I will go to the grave defending, no matter, and you just realize that that's what a lot of life is made up of, is a handful of people that you learn to really love and trust. If you can work with, that's the thing that I'm so incredibly grateful for now, is, there are people that I used to work with that we don't work with anymore, that I would rehire in a second. But, right now I look around the company at some of the people that I get to work with every day, and it's both, it's an honor to work with them, but I don't think I could have possibly found that group of people and been aligned with them in that way in only good times. So I don't know, I'm like, yeah, the really, we're talking about the transition from Silicon Valley darling to where like our company is doing 100 times better than it did when we were the Silicon Valley darlings, and nobody cares. And that's awesome. It's like the best thing ever.
Totally.
And you're like, oh,
because your customers care and your team cares. Like the people
yeah,
who
it makes me feel better
care.
looking at the actual results and looking at the data. And then I don't care what Twitter says. Like Twitter can,
totally,
and over time you get to know people who are, I know people who make billions of dollars a year personally and are like, way more successful than any, the hottest startup you can imagine is, and have scaled, and they're completely below the radar. And, I think being that the business I'm running is a school, that will probably not be an option. Like I have to be in front of regulators and students. But I envy that a little bit, So I've learned to completely dissociate the popularity or the hype with the success of a business. And I used to think that they were at a minimum correlated, and I don't anymore.
And now you don't. Yeah.
They may be correlated up to a certain threshold at which they become inversely correlated, actually.
Totally.
Like Google was never trying to show how well Google was doing. Google was trying to hide how well Google was doing so that 100%. Microsoft could copy it.
100%.
Yeah.
We're really inspired by your journey. I mean, even if we weren't personal friends, you've been building it in public, and seeing you go through so much, and of course do such like mission driven work, and the highs, the lows, and then the highs again, and seeing you guys crush it, I think is just one of the more inspiring stories in tech and for other CEOs. And so we're grateful for you for sharing it with us today and in the arena.
Awesome. Thanks for chatting. It was good to, we need to catch up sometime. It's been a minute. So
yeah.
Thanks for opening up and letting us like kind of badger you too. We appreciate your candor.
Yeah, for sure.
And other founders will appreciate the war stories.
Yeah, this is better than the therapy that I don't believe in. So.
100%. Thanks for listening to In the Arena. If you enjoyed the conversation, please like, subscribe, and share by leaving us a review and telling everyone you know. And please feel free to reach out to us on Twitter at inthearena_pod. We'd love your suggestions on who else has an intense experience to share.